Thank you for this opportunity to share my thoughts to you. The presentation, whose community coalescing the self of community worker, I wanted to share some of my preliminary thoughts on an academic paper that I'm working on, based on my experiences as well as theoretical learning. I work in a social work program in McEwen University in Canada. Um, but I have my education and the social work experience from India as well. So this paper, this presentation is based on my experiences as well as academic thinking. Uh, the first question is whose community? So we see community workers. I use the word community worker. It could be different terms in different countries and different communities. It can be a social worker, it could be a community worker. So the question is, whom does the community worker represent when the worker is working in the community? In usual, the worker is being appointed by the agency. It could be an NGO, it could be a non-profit organization. There was very interesting observations aligned to my discussions, previous presentations. It could be sometimes the community itself may be hiring a person, or it could be a worker themselves interested to work in a community and working to the with the community. Um, when I say community, I refer to two types of communities. One is the usual geographical communities that we usually see in interventions of a state government or of the NGOs. It could also be community of interest, which means people belonging to a particular uh, characteristics or a requirement. Say, for example, when we talk about Canada, we talk as a community of immigrant community, and we may specifically say immigrant community from or Latino immigrant community or Indian immigrant community, who may not be geographically connected, but they may be identified as community. Or we say sexual minorities, that also could be a community of interest. So we identify that a community worker is been working in the agency in a community, and there are several scenarios, as I said earlier. It could be appointed, and there are some community workers who have been developed or been evolved from the very nature of a community, and that is where we see lots of social activists coming up. Maybe I may not be discussing or bringing in the point of social activists or people who have been evolved from those communities in this discussion. My discussion is basically focused upon the professional workers who have been deployed in the communities by various community development agencies, including the state government agencies. So when we look at the worker in the community, one of the key aspects need to be looked at is the social location of the worker. What is the social location of the worker? Is that worker from that community itself? Does the worker represent the socio-political, ethnographic, anthropological characteristics of the community? I don't want to use the word client, or I don't want to use the word receiver, but the way I wanted to put it as a kind of partnership with the community. Yeah. And there are lots of power imbalances, privileges for the worker in relation to the community. And to give one example from India, there is people from uh, workers working in the less developed communities or poor socioeconomic communities usually belongs to the lower strata of the society, and that lower strata of the community status being defined by one key factor is caste in Indian context. Some of you may be knowing caste, and there are upper caste, lower caste kind of stuff. And what is the caste of the worker? If the worker is from an upper caste, there is a privilege for the worker. To take an example from Canada, if there is a community worker who is white and working with the black community or an immigrant community, there is a very specific conscious or unconscious privilege given to the worker. So there are several factors like color of the skin, caste, class, education, position, authority, and authority comes in when the state, when a worker is being appointed by the state government or state authority. Understanding the privileges of the worker is a very significant factor, and that is where the self-reflection of the worker comes in. How far the worker is able to understand the privileges, as well as understand how these privileges affect the relationship and the power imbalances of the community is a fundamental question. I also used the word professional location along with the social location. And what I mean by professional location is how this worker is being deployed in the community. What is the agenda of the agency which is deploying or employing the worker in the community? What is the politics behind the funding of the agency? And those professional location is very significant. And there has been lots of discussion in community development sector throughout the globe on the various political dimensions of funding, all those geopolitics, all those issues involved in community work. To give one example, when I was working as a community worker in India, way back in late 1990s and early 2000s, one of the major funding was for HIV/AIDS programs, and that was the scenario globally for HIV/AIDS funding. Whereas the most important requirement was not for HIV/AIDS funding. Globally, even now, the most important requirement is for eradicate poverty. So was in India, and it was not HIV/AIDS that was killing most people. It was still tuberculosis that was killing at that time. But the funding, if tuberculosis required $50 and HIV/AIDS required $1, what the receiving of the fund was for like the vice versa, the opposite direction of it. So what I mean by professional location is how far the worker is able to identify and understand the agenda settings behind the agency, the state, the funding, the process involved in the community work. And all this asks for self-reflection of the worker. And at the end of it, is the worker able to ally themselves with the community? And allying with the community happens at least in three contexts. One is personal. Do you work in the community because I have been employed, I have been paid for it, or do I have a personal rationale for working in a community? Second is professional one. Do I work in the community because of my professional commitment, or does my profession also uphold the values that I work for in the community? It could be broadly in the context of human rights, social justice, and everything. And third is, does it align with the agency's or the mandate of the agency, or the value base, the professional conduct, the ethics of the agency? And these aligning with the community in the personal, professional, agency context is what is required to make a transformative change in the community. And all these questions have been simply put in one of the very famous quotes by Laila Watson, who is an indigenous leader from Australia. And she says, if you have come here to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, let us work together. So when I work with the community, the changes in the community is connected to my liberation, my growth, my change. And when I say my, the worker, it is also related to the personal, professional, larger societal context of the society as well. And if a worker is not able to see that dimension of community work is not going to make any kind of transformative change. And this is what I put in the title, coalescing, like embedding, combining of the value basis, the rationale of the worker with that of the community, of the agency, and themselves. One more point I wanted to share along with this one is this is one of my areas of research, is basically how do you engage community. And when we look at allying, one of the key pieces for the social worker or the community worker to know is that you are not the hero. It is the community. The community is the hero. But the community know more than you. Community have the resources and they have the solutions for their problems. Oftentimes the agency as well as the community worker feels that they have done the work. No, it is the community. And of course, there are lots of discussion about catalyzing, empowering the community, all those kind of things. Yeah, this is my last slide. I'm just concluding my thoughts. So for the community worker, one is to identify the rationale of the work, how far they're able to interlink and embed them to their personal self, their professional self, and the agenda of the agency. Second is it is allied with the community. It is not the project is or the program is not done just because the agency wants it, but the community needs it, and it is also allied with the agency and the worker. Cognizant of the power imbalances, the privileges, the context of it, and finally realizing the community as the heroes and not the worker as the hero. These are some of the references I have made for this initial discussion on my academic work. Thank you everyone for your patience to attend this presentation.